you and ask you to move and all that other stuff?
Well, we're from Boston, and this was good.
Oh, excellent. You here visiting?
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right, are we set? All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, including our visitors from Boston. And thank you for our virtual audience for watching us. This is an historic occasion in that we have two authors here from Penzler Publishers. Our old friend, a better friend, our longtime friend, is that kinder? Our longtime friend, Thomas Perry, who, gosh, how long have we been together now?
I don't know. I think about 25 years or so.
Probably more.
Like that, more.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know. After about 25, it's
Sort of blurs.
it's kind of
Right. So Tom came on the mystery scene with a real vengeance from Hollywood and wrote a fabulous book called Sleeping Dogs, right? Which then went on. I do have the right dog, right?
You're asking about the first book. First book was The Butcher's Boy.
The Butcher's Boy.
Yeah.
The reason I said Sleeping Dog was because I reordered it today. It stuck
well,
in
that
my
was
head.
good. Well, that's
Right.
the second.
That was the sequel. Right.
was
So The
the
Butcher's
sequel.
Boy, which won the Edgar and various other plaudits. Tom is also the winner of the Hammett Award, which I thought was very distinguished.
Wow.
Well, it is. Named after Dashiell Hammett. It's an international award, so, and it's done by a panel of judges. I always think in many ways it's the most prestigious of the mystery awards because it's not a popularity contest and it's not awarded by anybody you actually know. It's by people who read your book, right?
Well, it's nice to have, any kind of positive news that arrives in your little closed world while you're writing. But that's probably not as good for you as having somebody write a review that's actually critical. You really don't want to be convinced that you're already
That you're wonderful.
really good, that you're wonderful, and you don't
Right.
make mistakes or something.
So
like
ego can get in the way of actual craft. Is that what you're saying?
that. Yeah, something like that.
Right.
Right.
Tom is also the author of The Old Man, which is a TV series. Yeah, we can talk about that because it had various ups and downs on its way to production, didn't it? Actually, why don't we talk about it now, and then I'll introduce Josh, because the star was really a great part of the difficulty in getting it to the screen.
Well, in a way, he was both. That is, he was the reason it went to the screen and the reason why we were worried for so long. It was Jeff Bridges is one of the stars. He's the sort of main star, and John Lithgow and Amy Brenneman are the other sort of principal characters in the series, which is on FX Hulu. I don't know what it's going to be on this year. I don't know. Maybe Disney will buy another network or something and put it on, or maybe they'll go. Maybe, I don't know if he's growing or if he's not. But anyway, what happened is, Jeff Bridges was cast in the role, and they were shooting the series, and at a certain point, I have to say, sort of interrupt myself in this, that when Jeff Bridges started in the series, I went and onto the set to see what, sort of watch him work for a day and introduce myself and all that stuff. And, he was just wonderful, just great. I watched what he was doing with this scene that I had written, and I really thought, he gets it. He absolutely gets it. And then, after he had done it a couple of times, he said, I want to do it one more time. And he was doing, in other words, this is a real workman. And then the last thing that I heard as he was working, and I think it was actually a part of the first episode, but it was shot about 4 weeks in. And I was told, there's a very long, difficult athletic fight scene that occurs in the first episode. And it's, basically an elderly man fighting a younger man for a knife, or, essentially each of them trying to kill the other. And he did a lot of it himself, although he is a, great stunt man and so on. And I was told that, they'd shot it in the desert and at night, and supposedly he refused to go home. Even when it was like 2 o'clock when they finished shooting, he refused to go home before everybody else could go home. Which, if you've ever worked in television, that's not the usual star behavior. Anyway, I mean, you know, he won everybody over, and partly because of the way he behaved, everybody else. You know, I went on to the set, and I can tell you it was a happy set. There's a, you know, an unhappy set is really something to behold. But right after that, he went to the doctor for a normal checkup, and they discovered he had lymphoma. And you know, it was a sort of a bad progressed case, and so on. They were very worried about him, and but they took care of him, and he got better. And but the problem was that while he was getting better from that, he got COVID because he had no immune. You know, essentially you're taking chemo, right, and you are vulnerable to anything. So we all waited for, I don't know, maybe 6 months or so, just worried, worried, worried. It's not really at this point because of whether the show would go on or not, but this is such a wonderful man and such a great actor. And, you know, we've seen him in a million things, and the thought that he was, you know, going to die of this was horrible. And then, wonder of wonders, he, you know, came through and was completely cured, and, you know, for now, at least. And they shot the rest of the first season, and it was picked up for this coming season. So they'll probably be on again in June. So it's been fun. It's a fun thing for me to watch somebody, and also because, you know, writers are always complaining about how the changes that somebody makes in their, you know, masterpiece and all that. And actually, for me, it was sort of interesting to see what it inspired in the people who wrote the screenplays. You know, I actually found myself watching this thing that was based on one of my books and wondering what was going to happen next, which I actually really enjoyed. It was fun. It's been a fun trip.
Well, you had, you know, kind of a different perspective since you wrote for Hollywood before you became a full-time crime writer. So, you know, it was, I suspect that contributed to your reactions to the whole thing.
Well, I'm sure it did. I mean, the two guys who wrote all of the scripts are John Steinberg and Robert Levine, who were the writers and executive producers of what was called the Black Sails or something. It was the pirate thing that was shot in South Africa. It was a successful series for about 4 years, and, you know, they were pretty. I was very pleased with what they did. So.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that, because when Tom and I had lunch a couple of years ago, it wasn't at all clear that Jeff Bridges was going to return and that the whole thing would actually happen. So
Yeah,
it's nice to have a happy ending. Well, who is this gentleman, you want to know? And the answer is, his name is, let me see if I can pronounce it right, J.S.H. Golertner. I knew I couldn't do it. All right, very good. But he's here tonight in a dual personality because he's also here as Josh Haven, and his first crime novel right there. But we knew him before he wrote his first crime novel with these two wonderful books. What am I going to call you? Just J.H., and then I can finesse the pronunciation? Oh, well.
Call me Josh.
Josh. I'll call him Josh. Anyway, Hold Fast and Captain Gray's Gambits are absolutely fabulous books. If you are fond of Patrick O'Brien, if you read Bernard Cornwell, if you like books like that, they are just superb. And the chess element, for any of you who watched The Queen's Gambit, really plays into the second book, Captain Gray's Gambit.
Yeah, I wrote. I.
No, yours is on.
Yeah, sorry, it's my first time doing this. It's nice to know it'll be documented for all eternity. But I've been sitting up here
Don't fall
trying not
off
to
the chair.
I wrote that Captain Gray's Gambit before the Queen's Gambit came out, and it was just titled Gambit. And I said, okay, we have to change the title now to Captain Gray's Gambit, which was just, you know, it's a nice title. Gambit would have been better, but I'm still mad at that TV show for you know, beating me to the post with chess. I thought I'd invented writing about chess, of course. So it was.
Actually, you should be really grateful for the TV show, because lots of people who watched it will be more inclined to read your books. So
Yeah,
they
well,
kind of
I'll
did
tell people it's
marketing
a
for you.
prequel.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about Holdfast and Captain Gray's Gambit before we talk about your mystery novel? Because Holdfast has some really wonderful naval action scenes. I thought they were terrific.
Well, I'd been reading a lot of Patrick O'Brien, who I love, and I was driving back from the beach with my then girlfriend, and we stopped at at like a bric-a-brac sale, a garage sale, and there was a copy of Goldfinger on sale, the novel. And I thought, boy, it would be great if someone wrote one of these. Like we've got Bernard Cornwell for the Army, and we've got Patrick O'Brien for the Navy. Who's doing the spy version of the Napoleonic Wars? And it turned out no one was. So I wrote that, and everything sort of unfolded from there.
They're really exciting. I love adventures like that. But
It's
they
true, they're
also,
fantastic. They're really
yeah,
good.
no, they really are. Yeah, I'm saying it. You can say it. It's all good. And it's an exciting time too. And I remind us as we're sitting here wondering what's going to happen in the war in the Ukraine. The war that he's writing about went on for 20 years, and nobody knew how it was going to come out until the Battle of Waterloo. So we are in June of 1815 before we actually know what happened, who was going to win. And the communications were so bad as such that even though Wellington had won, the news didn't really get reliably to London for a while after that. So that's a long time to live through a conflict like that. But what good news for you?
Yeah, well, actually, it was Patrick O'Brien said that if he had known the series was going to be successful, he would have taken a little slower moving through the war because the first book is 180. Well, actually, it starts in 1799 and then
Right.
jumps to 1803 and then to 1814. So I was not going to make that mistake. My editor for that was Star Lawrence, who was Patrick O'Brien's editor, and he was wanted to make sure that I took this year by year so I wouldn't run out of books too quickly.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. And one of the things that happens is there's some Arthur Wellesley shows up in the book. And actually, Arthur Wellesley is from, am I right? It's an Irish family.
Yeah, he was born in Ireland. He liked to point out to people that he wasn't actually Irish because I guess at that time,
British and Irish.
well, he apparently what he said to people was being born in a stall doesn't make you a horse. So that's what he'd tell people when they said he was born in Ireland. But he yeah, he was born in
Right.
Ireland.
So he was actually stationed in India before he became Wellington and fought in the Peninsula Wars in Portugal, and then eventually became the commander in chief at Waterloo, and eventually became the Duke of Wellington. So it's really cool to see him back before anybody knew him. I love that. Right. So Tom, let's talk about Murder Book. You're back in the Midwest. What is it about small towns in the Midwest that you're either in LA or often in the Midwest or in upstate New York?
Well, I was born and brought up in a town called Tonawanda, New York, city of Tonawanda, not North Tonawanda, nor the town of Tonawanda, but the city of Tonawanda had 12,000 people. And so small towns are kind of, let's say, a familiar habitat. So I kind of know how they work. I know how it feels to live in smaller places. And I kind of miss them sometimes, even if I have to invent them. Everything, the small town that's in Murder Book, which is called Parkman's Elbow, is entirely a product of my imagination, as is the Ash River that runs along it, and really much of what goes on in this small town area is essentially um, a made up place. But
Sorry to hear that. It seems so pleasant.
yeah, well,
I mean, aside from the criminals, but
right. Well, I mean, there's certain things that if you live on the planet, you sort of know how the planet works or something. You know how the grass grows and what birds are likely to live along the river and things of that sort. But anyway, this is a situation in which a guy named um, Harry Duncan, who was a former cop, former LAPD guy, who was trained there and then went on at various times to work in other police forces in different parts of the country, um, is suddenly, well, he's working now as a private investigator and who sort of trades off of his experience by being often hired by public entities to consult on things having to do with organized crime, because he spent an awful lot of time learning about it, and so now he consults, and he gets his latest client, and his latest client turns out to be the U.S. attorney for the the Northern District of Illinois, who saw his name on a list of reputable consultants on organized crime and realized that he was the husband that she had walked out on 15 years earlier. And he doesn't expect him to be very affectionate to her or to particularly be glad to see her, but she knows that he has all of the qualities. She knows, in other words, he knows her and she knows him, and they each know that they can be trusted, and she knows that if you're looking for a situation where you need somebody who is truly an expert and who is truly fearless and is likely to be reliable in a terrible situation, this is your guy. So she manages through brute force and ingenuity to talk him into taking a sort of tentative look at this area of the Midwest in which suddenly career criminals from the Chicago area are suddenly turning up in these little towns in the Midwest, and that what she's afraid of is that it might be the kind of the birth of a new organized crime syndicate. Because what are these guys doing in this small place? And so what he's hired to do is to go as an expert, go into these little towns and take a look and see if there are any signs that something is amiss, that something's happening that really ought to be the subject of a full-on FBI investigation. And she's, for various almost political reasons, in a situation where she doesn't want to go, let's say, propose such a thing unless she has some real evidence that something's happening that really has to be looked at. And so he's the one to go and find out what's happening. And the title Murder Book has to do with what he does when he collects evidence. He's a trained police officer for many years, and he does what what he was trained to do, which is that if there's a homicide, for instance, what they do is make what they call a murder book. They call it that to each other. It isn't the official name, but it's, what homicide detectives call it. They collect all of the evidence, all of the things that they've looked at, all the people that they've interviewed, all the photographs they've taken, all the measurements, what's the weapon, and so on, and collect it in a notebook. And the notebooks tend to grow and grow until they've got everything that they can. But what this murder book is, what happens, you can hand that off. That is, if you retire and you haven't solved this case, somebody else is going to have that evidence. And all the work you did, all of the evidence and so on, is going to be in there. And that's what he does when he collects information. He puts it in a murder book because that's what he knows how to do. So
I've always thought that if Tom hadn't become a writer, he'd make an excellent career criminal, because he really has a mind that sort of gravitates naturally to fraud. And I've often thought that the reason that you like small towns is you can take a macro thing, like a potential organized crime syndicate, and by putting it in a micro situation, you can see it a lot better than if you were like doing this in greater Los Angeles or something.
yeah, I mean, that's.
I mean, you like
probably
that
true.
stage, don't
Especially
you?
the fraud part.
Yeah. Years ago, Tom wrote a book about insurance fraud in a very small town that was one of the best It's not really a heist novel. I'm trying to remember. Well, Josh, what would you call it? That kind of if you were going to send somebody to commit insurance fraud somewhere, what I'm trying to figure out. It's not a heist
A crime
exactly.
thriller,
No, that's boring. No, 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 no.
an insurance thriller.
Well,
That
no,
would be more
I guess
exciting.
I'm looking for fraud because not all crime novels have to have murders in them, you know.
Actually, this gives me an opportunity. I really loved
Yeah.
the way you used the insurance companies in your book, in the new one.
Everyone's writing about insurance these days.
Yeah. Well, it's
Makes for a page turner. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed learning about the financial details of how to pull off a protection racket
oh
in
yeah.
Murder
Well,
Book. It's a good fallback in case the books don't work out.
that's right. Oh, you have to get together with a certain number of ominous-looking friends. That's
But yeah, and
part of
it's not wanting to put the bar out of business until you've collected a decent amount of protection money first. It's very well thought through. It's they should hand these out to people in high school in case they don't get into college and want an alternative. That's not a knock on not going to college, by the way. College is the worst, but it's yeah.
Well, thank you.
Also like the Sanjel Crane stuff. Sorry, I don't want to spoil anything, but the bird stuff was a nice.
Oh,
Yeah.
Tom loves process. That's the other thing that I've always enjoyed about his books is he really likes to develop process. The Jane Whitefield novels, for example, you're always so interested in building up, the whole escape route, the whole techniques that she uses. Um, you get so involved in them. It's really fun.
oh, good. Good. That's I'm glad people like them. That's I don't know. I've always felt really that probably the best way to kind of understand reality is through these minute details, because that's what reality is made of, right? It's you know gigantic things don't just happen. They're made up of all, I don't know, experiences are made up of all kinds of things, and so on. And in recent years, I've decided that probably the reason I get hooked on those things is just that I've always had terrible eyesight. So I can't see the big picture. I just look at I can only see
Good joke from Tom.
Huh?
Josh, how did you migrate from Patrick O'Brien into the world of crime fiction? Because this book has had the most wonderful reviews. It's really fast acting. There's lots of dark things going on. So, what got you interested in writing crime?
Well, a few things. This was supposed to be like the big seller, for a less niche audience. Everyone loves murder and death, Not that many people love the Napoleonic Wars, at least not as many as should. But also, I had finished. I'm a compulsive worker. I needed something new to work on, and Norton signed me for 3 of these Napoleonic War books, and I finished them all before the first one was published. So I needed to start on something new, and my agent told me I couldn't write another one until I had written something else. So that's why I wrote this. Just wanted to, my 2 great reading loves are historical fiction and crime fiction. So I'd done one, so I figured it was time to do the other one.
Well, it's a really interesting. Well, why don't you give us the pitch for the book, and then we can talk about it, or Tom can talk to you about it because he's read it. So, want to set it up for us?
Well, I figured there weren't enough good contemporary books about contemporary horseback train robberies, and it was a hole in the market that needed to be plugged immediately. And so that was the basis of this book. And also, a while ago I was on a train coming out of New York City, going Metro North to New Haven, and I was reading a collection of old New Yorker pieces, and one of them was about counterfeiting. I think it was by Sinclair McElway, and I was just reading through it, and it turned out the first man convicted of counterfeiting in North America at Plymouth Plantation was my great uncle. Named Peregrine White. It's an unusual name, which is why I happened to recognize it when I saw it. So I figured this counterfeiting thing clearly running in my blood. I was on a train. I was thinking about horse. When you can't get on a train without thinking about someone potentially robbing it on horseback. And between that and the counterfeiting,
Watched
that
too
was
many
the,
westerns.
yeah. Well, that's crazy. This is my first time out in Arizona, and they look exactly like westerns. You've got the cactuses. I always sort of half imagined were fictional because they're such absurd looking plants. But seeing them in person for the first time has been a real treat. They're all over the place.
Guess what? The thorns are real too.
Yeah, so that was the genesis of the book. I wanted to write something about counterfeiting, and I wanted to work in a train robbery. Also, I was very irritated with Amtrak. I was trying to travel across the country, and the Amtrak proposed schedule on their website was going to take 42 days, which just seemed slightly impractical because I needed to be there in slightly less time than that, and so figured robbing an Amtrak train was justice.
Well, all right. So you found a way to make counterfeiting pay without going to jail by turning it into a book, right?
Yeah, well, for now, I'm keeping the rest of the counterfeiting game in my hip pocket just in case I need another profession. That is, in case the books and the protection racket don't work out, then I can fall back on counterfeiting.
Yeah, it's a nice match. You
So
can,
Tom, you read his book. You should really be talking to him because you're the pro here.
well, just one thing that let's say a couple of things that I liked your okay. I think it's Raymond Chandler, wasn't it, who said he liked Hammett because he gave murder back to the kind of people who commit murders. It's not like people in a British country house and I have you all together and don't try to leave the room and you could have done it, you could have done that sort of thing. It's thugs. It's people that really want to hurt you. They are bad people. It's like people. It's sort of become fashionable to complain about police. If you don't like police, spend some time with criminals sometime. Get to know a few. See what they think and what they say. And these are people that feel real. They really do, and they come. That's terrific.
Thank you.
It is. I mean, it's and also her. I can't remember her name now. It's the counterfeiter.
Kelly, I think.
Kelly.
It's been a while since I've read it too.
I know.
So.
I'm not good with names. It's it sounds ridiculous, but if a name sounds like it could be somebody's real name, I'll forget it. If it's Agamemnon Fus, I'll remember it. But anyway, she feels real too. There's essentially what happens is that a guy who was unjustly convicted of a crime was sent to federal prison for a long time. And when he gets out, the person waiting for him is a former girlfriend, Kelly, who gives him a ride to her place and so on. And she's basically getting him involved in her incredible crime, which I don't want to blow it or reveal what it is, but I mean, it has to do with counterfeiting. It has to do with her knowledge and love of art. It has to do with the sort of old relationship that he had with her and with his ability to connect with the kind of people that you would recruit if you wanted to do a crime.
Yeah, it's sort of the moral of the story is that if you go to college and get an art degree, then you're going to end up having to counterfeit professionally.
That's true. Yeah.
I thought one thing I thought was pretty interesting, and it's come up before, but I've made a huge amount of thought, is what if you have been in prison for a long period of time and they let you out and there's nobody there, your life has to restart, but how does it restart when in fact, you may be disconnected from everything you knew before? Do you even have a ride, from the prison to the nearest place? Do you have a job? Do you have a place to live? Do you have whatever? Do you even have, do you just wear the clothes you came in with? I mean, if you've been in prison for a long time, you've been wearing prison clothes, right? So what do they let you out with?
Well, not speaking from personal experience, but I think they let you out with the stuff you went in with, and it is a good question. If your life has been completely destroyed, especially by a false conviction, and you're convicted for something you didn't do, and even if you get let out later, it doesn't really undo the time you spent in prison. So it has a pretty deleterious effect on someone, I would think. Again, not speaking from personal experience, and I know they say write about what you know, but it didn't seem worth it to go to prison
Uh,
for verisimilitude. But
oh,
But I bring it up just to point out that it makes him vulnerable. If he comes out and it's Kelly there, he doesn't really have any other particularly good choices at that moment. And I wonder if that's one reason, that there's a lot of recidivism is just because when you emerge, there's no really often there's no great life choice available to you. I know they work a lot in some prisons anyway about, what you're going to do when you get out, some kind of rehabilitation or retraining or something. But what if you just stroll out and then there's only Kelly, which is sort of what happens here?
yeah. Well, it's a good question. I think they should probably teach more felons to write because there's a lot of good material in that, and they'd have something to do when they got out of prison.
well,
But
So let's talk about Klimt, right? Gustav Klimt. Did any of you see the movie Woman of Gold? Now, I mean, he's a painting. He was in Austria at the turn of the 20th century, and he painted some very rich people anyway. I don't know if they were famous, but one of them was a particular woman. And it's now in New York City at the trying to remember the name of the gallery. It's north of
the Neue Gallery.
yeah, thank you. The Noy Gallery, which is that Ronald Lauder, I think,
Yeah.
finances it, right? But it was because the Nazis confiscated um, artwork from a particularly wealthy Jewish family in Vienna. This painting was one of the things that was confiscated. And the movie and the book are all about the effort of one of the heirs to reclaim the painting. Um, which eventually got sold to Ronald Lauder, but it was all part of that whole Nazi repatriation thing. But he's a fabulous artist. There's gold all over her. I've been to Vienna and actually seen the Klimt, and there's some wonderful. I'm trying to remember what the name of the big gallery. Do you remember, Tom, the big gallery in Vienna that? It's a
no,
very it's in a
don't.
palace and it's very famous, and I'm going blank
Oh.
because I'm old and I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Well,
I would have
anyway,
known right
if you
if
see
I right after the movie, I would have known.
Yeah,
but,
if you see a whole
was-
bunch of Klimts together, it can be just blinding because
Yeah.
of the shapes and the use of the gold and the colors and everything. So, why Klimt?
I've always really loved Klimt, and he was a fantastic draftsman, which sort of comes through in the paintings, but also because the colors and the design are such an emphasis, you don't fully appreciate the naturalism of his drawings of people, which are really fantastic. But also, I happened to be reading about Klimt at the time. The Nazis confiscated a lot of his paintings, and when they were retreating from France, they destroyed a number of his paintings. I think some were frescoes that they destroyed in situ, and then others were paintings that they just burned. There are color photographs of some of them. They're black and white photographs of some of them, and some of them are just completely lost. But I don't know. It seemed appropriate since the guy in the book who's stealing the Nazis are involved with the theft. I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but it seemed somehow appropriate.
But that would be particularly interesting if you were going to try to do some kind of chicanery there. If they're lost paintings, but nobody knows entirely for sure that they're
Yeah,
lost or
I
whatever.
worked on a play about that years ago. That it's never been staged. In fact, I don't think I finished it. But it was about someone trying to counterfeit a Picasso, a lost Picasso, and then finding out that the period canvas he's working with was not a cheap trivial painting. It was actually another lost painting that he's now painted over. So he's got to get back the copy he sold so he can clean it off. But I digress.
That's good.
No,
That's
no,
In
it's
case
all
anyone wants a good idea for a novel.
a,
any questions you'd like to ask.
hmm. I don't know. I'm not usually in the questioning side of this. I have to think about it whether I.
So do you want to hear more of my views on cactuses?
Well, I mean, I grew up in the East, and when I first saw cactuses for real, I thought, pretty amazing sculpture.
They're
This
very friendly
imagine.
looking plants.
That's right.
They got their arms up. And you can never hug them because of the needles. It's the tragedy of cactus.
Yeah, it's true.
You're talking about the spiral, right? So most of you get something that I write to you, and I think I sent you a picture. We decided this year to have Christmas lights professionally done. And so we did a tree in the house, but we did our giant saguaro, and it really is a giant saguaro. It's about 20 feet high. It took two guys and a bucket truck in 11 hours to wind the lights around the saguaro all the way up. And they came to take it down the other day, and it was two guys and a bucket truck trying not to get stabbed while they are unwinding it. But it was absolutely magnificent. A light, it just lit up the whole neighborhood. It was so much fun to do it. And I asked them if we could keep it, but they said their lights were not, they weren't licensed with these lights for year round. There, I don't know, there's some, I personally think it's because they want to come back and do it all over again next year. So I'm not too sure but anyway, they denuded it. And now I look at the cactus and it's not lit up. And I think, where to go? It's so amazing. It is.
Oh, you've got to light it up for other occasions. Do it for Valentine's Day and then Arbor Day.
So I'm going to get a
Flag
bucket
Day.
truck and go up there myself, right? But it really was an amazing thing to be doing. So I was very pleased with it. So anything you want to talk to Tom about since Tom was pondering?
Yeah, do you know that they actually put microchips in some of those cactuses to prevent people from stealing them?
Should, yeah.
I was curious about that. It turns out those saguaros are absurdly valuable. They're worth like several $100,000, and people just go out into the desert and steal them. So they started microchipping them.
There you go.
How embarrassed would you be if cops came to your house and said, "Sir, that is a stolen cactus, and we know it, and we're taking away your landscaper now."
Yeah,
That's another plot coming up,
Yeah.
right? Instead of
That's
your
right,
dog or
yeah.
your cat, they're going to take your.
That's right. Those guys got a job out of prison, which working for this light company, and that was
So let's talk about the women in your books because Tom, you have a really wonderful woman in the murder book. I like her a lot.
Well,
was-
two really wonderful.
Yeah.
Women.
well.
That's true. We've talked about but we haven't talked about the woman that he encounters when he arrives in this small town.
Oh, Renee. Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things about murder book is that in a way I'm kind of playing with things that you expect in a piece of fiction, and particularly crime fiction. And usually you have this extremely tough guy and who is, you can sort of tell kind of in the prime of life and a little bit maybe attractive, comes into, the stranger comes to town, and he comes into this restaurant, and this attractive woman about his age, which is, they're both about 40 or so, and they start, sort of flirting with each other and so on. And what you're expecting is that they're going to have some sort of an affair, some sort of a romance or something is going to happen. No, like instantly she realizes that that he doesn't appeal to her in the least, and is, tells him so, and just, so Renee is probably attractive partly so that you think that this is what's going to happen, and so no. And instead what happens is that, she goes out to get him some food in the kitchen and comes back and says, there's two guys fooling around with your car outside, That's it. That's her function at that moment. But that gets him started. That is, when he goes out, he realizes that these guys are getting ready to pull a sort of common scam on him, which is to pretend that they have some sort of relationship with the city, and he doesn't have the right license plate on or something of that sort. And so we're going to tow away your car, and but you could pay your fine as long as you do it before they get, your car up on the tow truck. After that, it's going to be really expensive. So, maybe you could pay us right now, and then we won't do that. So That's his introduction to the town. Makes him a little suspicious.
It's also it's very interesting that she's Renee is so, she's so good looking and so charming that he finds a little off putting.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I thought was an amusing touch. Instead of just being totally ensorcelled by her,
Yeah.
it's like this lady. She's had it good her whole life, and it's just a slightly irritating.
Well, also, you can sort of tell that she knows it, that she knows the effect that she has on, the first guy that comes by. I mean, he wasn't born yesterday. That's why he's who he is. He's a guy who has been around and who's been in quite a few jobs where, let's say, they involve differences of opinion, and so he's got a few scars and a few places where he got hurt and so on. But she, she's in a way she's sort of fun, but she turns out later to be very important, because, uh, but not in that way. I mean, so um, let's just say that a lot of things happen in this little town that makes him believe that yes, she was right. There is something going on. There is some kind of an organization here, and it does seem to be involved in doing a lot of the things that he's familiar with that gangs do. Um,
So the question is why?
the question
Right.
is why.
But you meant not Renee, but his ex is the one that
Yeah.
was right.
Right. Yeah.
Renee is, I think one of the things I like the best about Renee is her whole family history.
Yeah.
The restaurant that
Right.
has been in her family for generations, and, she wants to
Right.
keep it going. I'm not sure that, I think that has a lot of resonance in the small town. I think if you were in a big city or something, that would be, although
yeah.
there certainly are 100-year-old, institutions in major cities, but
Sure.
I
Well,
really like that about her.
The town that I grew up in, there was a bar called Jay's Log Cabin that was built in 1803, and it literally was like based on a log cabin, and it was in the house that I was born, let's say that I came home from the hospital to when I was born, was also built in 1803 and had rough timbers, and if you go in the basement, you could see what had been a tree is the beam holding the floor, and the basement was based on mortared stones, so it was quite a thing that they tore down. But anyway, in the East, things are old. That's all. It's just
For more about 1803, read either of these two books.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like
Tell us
Battle-
about Kelly because
Yeah.
she's a key player. Are there other women in your book, and what inspired Kelly? Did you actually know somebody like Kelly?
I've known a few girls who are a little like Kelly. None of them counterfeiters, but a few who would probably have made good counterfeiters. I knew a lot of girls in college. I went to college in the city in Manhattan, who are art students and very opinionated on the subject of art and knew a lot about art and didn't really have any plans for once they graduated. And once they did graduate, they sort of scattered out around the country finding jobs completely unrelated to art, which is sort of the situation. I got a degree in playwriting, which was well, it worked out kind of all right because I'm writing now, but for a while it wasn't too productive. The day I got a call from my agent saying that he wanted to represent Hold Fast, I was applying for a commercial truck driving school.
Wow.
So that's sort of what you do when you go to school and get an art degree. And but counterfeiting seemed like more fun. And as a woman, she she had her charm and sort of her femme fatality. I don't know if that's the correct conjugation of that, but dealing with the man, but also just her innate, intense knowledge of art and her skill in computing. And she in the book she went to Georgia Tech, which it's sort of a joke that she goes to a top-notch technical school to get an art degree. I knew someone who went to MIT and majored in French literature, which was actually so. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say about her. She's an interesting character. I didn't give her too much thought as a character qua female character, though people keep telling me I should. That these girls, partly the basis for Kelly, were telling me I should have more female protagonists. So that was part of it.
That's two of the people we've talked about in the book, but who are the rest of the gang?
In your book?
Oh, my book.
Yeah,
There's there are three sheep farmers from Montana who sort of form the core of the gang that ends up robbing the Amtrak train.
Because they're good at riding horseback.
It is, in fact, because they're good at riding horseback. That was their principal reason for being chosen, was because they were good at riding horseback. The sheep stuff didn't end up playing too much into the crime, though.
So
The-
what route
saving that for
is
sequel.
Amtrak taking in your book? Where is it going from where to where?
It's actually passing right through here, more or less, which was unplanned. And I've never been to this part of the country before, so I had to do all the research just by watching YouTube videos of people driving through the Southwest and, some old John Wayne movies, that sort of thing. Your normal book research.
What was Amtrak? They're up in Flagstaff because unfortunately Amtrak doesn't come down here anymore. So it goes across.
It's another like 47-day journey was proposed to me by Amtrak to come out here because I couldn't get a direct flight. So I thought, well, it'd be nice to take a train. But so
have to take a bus from Flagstaff down to Phoenix.
yeah, well, I mean, they wanted me to go from Florida up to Washington, and then from Washington to New Orleans, and then from New Orleans to Chicago, and Chicago back to through Texas or something. It was
When I was a child, my father was one of the people that put General Telephone together, and he used to commute from Chicago to Los Angeles. And you just got on the Super Chief, and it started in Chicago and went straight to Los Angeles. It was like 3.5 days. Those days are gone. Is that what we're saying?
yeah, halcyon days. It would have been faster just to get a boat through the Panama Canal, frankly, than taking Amtrak, which would have been a lot of fun, actually. But
I can see that. Right. So you have another book coming out in June, another crime novel. So what is it about? Give us a preview.
It's about Russia in the 90s. I met a guy a couple of years ago. It was a couple of years ago. Yeah, it was about a year and a half, 2 years ago, who had been a big player in Russia in the 90s. He was an investment banker, businessman, and he met a Czech guy who made a killing in privatizing Czech state industries when communism ended. And they had this idea to go to Russia together and buy up stakes in extremely undervalued companies, which would then become very valuable after the sort of post-Soviet democracy settled in, if it did settle in. And no one was really interested in this market because no one knew if the companies were going to even exist a few months down the line because of the state of affairs in Russia at the time. And it was a crazy period. There were murders left and right. Of course, not that much has changed in that particular regard. And a lot of people involved in this book have subsequently been murdered, actually, because it was a true story. I ended up writing this guy's more or less true story after meeting him several times, and the stories of several other people involved. And just the life in Russia in the 90s was just very cinematic, perfect for a movie, perfect for a novel. Very exciting stuff. I just, hearing these stories. One of the stories I made into the book, I was talking to an actual Czech businessman who told me that he got invited onto a sort of mobster's boat to go fishing in the Caspian Sea, and they went out onto the water, and he was waiting for them to pull out fishing poles, and instead they took out a big Soviet army box, which had machine guns in it. They said, "This is how we fish." Like, are we going to have a gunfight with other people on the Caspian Sea to like steal their sturgeon? He said, "No, it's much more civilized than that. We put out all of our guns, and they put out all of their guns, and whoever has more gets all the fish." And so that was their fishing, and that was just one of many really fantastically crazy stories of things that happened in the 90s in Russia. So that was the basis for the book. It's a true story with a lot of little true anecdotes like that salted in. Basically, it's about the energy industry in Russia and how it came to be owned by the people it's owned by now. how it went from sort of communism to a brief period of private ownership and then to the oligarchy that runs Russia now. So, good stuff.
Oh.
I really can't recommend it enough.
Well, we have to wait till June. Does it have a title?
It's called The Siberia Job, or possibly Siberia Job. Can't remember if there's a
If those there.
yeah.
You know, I had to look up your book. I don't remember how many times, Tom, to see if there was a the before murder book.
Yeah, that was suggested, and I, you know,
You liked it like
I
it
want to
was.
save that. I want to save it in the,
Saving the for future use.
yeah, yeah. You never
See,
know when you may
when
need
you're
an
when you're
article.
Thomas Perry and someone tries to stick something onto the front of your book title, you've got the juice to say no. Didn't work with
No,
Gambit.
no, I just have an understanding editor. It does, allows me to hang myself whenever I want to.
Well, that's funny. My editor isn't understanding at all.
Well,
We have the same editor. So,
yeah, I know. Well,
hi,
Wow.
Otto.
So, Tom, I love the birds. And my final question for you is why did you decide? I mean, I think they're absolutely wonderful and they're a major part of this book, but what do you know about birds?
Well,
That seems like
it's,
weird. If you haven't read the book, you don't really understand my
oh,
question,
okay.
but trust me, the birds are really crucial.
If you go online to the Cornell University Ornithology Department, you will actually be treated, if you want to be, to the sound of the calls of different birds, so you can identify what these birds are. And this particular set of birds was distinctive enough and at the same time common enough that what happens in the book could actually happen.
I figured it would because you're so good at that.
Oh, well, thank you.
You know, working out. No, as I said earlier, you're really good on process, but you really like how things work and then applying them to your stories.
I do. I mean, it's, that's part of the fun of reading, is that we can pick up all these little things and see what their implications are in certain contexts and so on. But this is a situation where it becomes a life and death matter for him to identify a place that he only hears on a phone call. And so what he's doing is picking up noises that are in the background of this phone call so that you can figure out where is a place within this region that has the combination of sounds that I'm hearing in this phone call. And he realized, bird calls are one thing. And so, he goes and tries to find out what kind of bird this is and where it would be if it were, And for some reason, anyway, I don't want to
You
go
don't want to
too
say
deeply.
any more than that.
Yeah, I
No,
don't
no,
wanna
no. But I
go too
thought it
deeply
was
into
extremely clever. I'm always impressed by Tom's craft, trying to figure out all this stuff. I mean, in the Jane Whitefields over the years, I've learned a lot about how to make people disappear, how to track them over land, you know. Are you, speaking of Jane, are you going to be writing another Jane anytime soon?
Not immediately. I'm working on something else right now that, I'm at the point where I have enough marks on the page, enough pages, but it's not ready to go yet. So I'm, working on trying to do that all important mea culpa thing where you fix the things that are wrong and try to overcome your sins to make the thing into a good book.
So that's the book for next year?
That's the book for next year. Yeah.
This is where having an understanding and clever wife comes into play.
Well, that we'll see. We'll see what works. What of the many things that
Well, isn't Joe your first reader?
absolutely. Joe is, as I said before we were being recorded, marrying the right person is the closest thing on the planet to having a superpower. That you have another person who is in our case, she's smarter than I am, and is also has a PhD in English and is a fine novelist and poet and writer. And I'm sure that today the the people who run the Los Angeles Times are probably getting blisters from her latest letter that she wrote to the editor, which appeared this morning. Um, so she is also my writing partner in television. And we wrote television as partners for 11 years, and so she's my first reader, and it takes an incredible amount of courage to be able to say to the person that you live with um, that something's not working in their novel that they're suffering through. So, because we work together, we uh, are both we both try to be as frank as possible. So,
And civilized. Plus, Joe has an endless supply of toffee. Sometimes she
yeah.
brings it over here. I don't know if she bribes you with toffee, but I can tell you I'm a sucker for it.
No, it's not toffee, and that's not what I respond to.
We won't go any further there. So, Josh, tell us about the third Captain Gray, which I can hardly wait for because that comes out in July and the other book comes out in June. So that's amazing that you're going to have two books back to back.
Yeah, it's an exciting time for me. It's called the Montevideo Brief. It's about the last gold armada that was shipped from the Spanish colonies in the New World to Spain, the old Spain in the old world. It was intercepted by the British. I've spoiled the end of the novel. It may be intercepted by the British before it reaches port in Spain. And there was a real secret treaty between Spain and France that Spain was going to enter the war on France's side after this last shipment of gold made it safely to port. They didn't want to declare war sooner because then the British would capture their gold, and they needed the gold for their economy also to have money to fight the war. So it was the British figured out that they found out about this treaty, they found out about the shipment, and they figured that if they could intercept it, they could cut Spain off at the knees before they joined the war on Napoleon's side, which may or may not happen in the book. I don't want to spoil the ending. If you don't know your history, if you do know your history, you'll know that the British do successfully intercept it, but you won't know why unless you read the book, which is again it's a fantastic book. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's
I can hardly wait to read it. I love spy stories, and the fact that it is set in the Napoleonic era. There's a lot still going on today. One of the really interesting things I think about modern spy stories is because everything can be hacked, that spies have gone back to old technique. They're actually doing letter drops, and meeting on benches and parks and passing things in newspapers and stuff because, it's too easy in a digital age for stuff to get intercepted. So you're kind of coming back into fashion.
Yeah, it's a very close friend of mine who is a doctor. Was actually recruited by the CIA out of college, and one of the things they wanted to test him on was his handwriting, and his handwriting was terrible, and I think that actually kind of crippled his future job prospects. So everything
made
has
him
to
a
be
doctor.
handwritten. Yeah, well, that's why it worked out perfectly.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
Hi,
Patrick,
Anthony.
do we have any questions from the viewing audience before we ask for the?
Russ asks, Josh, he says, I love the book. It's twists and turns and surprising.
Thank you.
Magnificent ending. Was this your
Also, thank you.
original, or did it evolve as you were writing?
Depends. Which book are we talking about?
Talking about
Josh, fake money.
Right. Yeah, I think that was the original ending. That's I don't want to give away too much because it's a fantastic twist. You'll all love it. But it was the original ending, and that was kind of what I was building for. Some of the stuff leading up to it got changed over time, but that was the big finale that I was hoping for.
It had to
Thank
be
you.
because you were doing the magician thing. Look at all this stuff going on over here. Don't look at this. Look at this.
Actually, a good question is both for the kind of books you both write. Do you know the ending when you start writing, or
Uh,
does it evolve as you're writing?
Usually I don't know the ending, but I know who's going to be standing up and who's not. That's about it.
And how about you,
Yeah.
Josh? Did you know what the end was?
Yeah, I know the ending. I know everything that's going to happen in the book before I start writing, and I don't like to I mean, not every
Mm.
page, but I like to
Yeah.
have everything plotted out pretty carefully before I get going.
Yeah, I don't, because what happens with me is, it takes about a year, right? And or at least at my advanced age, it takes about a year. And I don't want to write a book which consists of the best idea I had on the first day. I want it to be the best idea I had in a year. So I'm kind of open to changes all the way along, or I try to be. I try to not shut any doors, or let's say not shut too many doors.
Well, that's
Yeah.
that's why you're best-selling author of the, and mine just says Josh Haven.
You just
Well, you can
started.
put
Yeah.
what you
Come on.
want on your, you can put.
Fred or Tom. Two questions. Would there be any more Jane Whitefield books? And you said yes, probably. Or
Not immediately.
Not immediately, but probably. I mean, what happens is if I don't write about her for a while, people ask me about it, and then I sort of start thinking about how much I miss thinking about that world, and her, and so on. So
will you be making a cameo appearance in The Old Man, like Lee Child did in Reacher?
Or Alfred Hitchcock, often.
no.
Well, have you considered doing a cameo in Reacher?
Yeah, that would be good. I mean, part of the problem is, I don't know if you've ever seen either John Lithgow or Jeff Bridges in person, but next to them, I look like a dwarf. So, probably, unless I'm lying down, like if I'm dead, sort of, I guess Hitchcock was dead in a couple of things, he was the corpse. I would be the corpse, but I won't be anything else. So.
Last one is from Cody, who asks, Tom, had you ever considered bringing back Sid and Ronnie Abel from 40 Thieves for our novel?
Yes. Don't have any plans at the moment. That's another thing that I learned over the years, that if I plan too far ahead, the biggest piece of fiction there is it's the plan. By the time I get there,
I like that. Phil, is that one of your characters?
yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, there are actually a couple of Jack Till books, so, but it's one of those things where you sort of, you get to a certain age and you realize, okay, how many more stories am I going to have time to tell, write down. And if you go back and do something you've already done, or something that's based on what you've already done, that's one new idea that you aren't going to have time to write. So I don't know. We'll see.
How about any of you in the room? Any of you have questions you'd like to ask?
I was just wondering, your books that are coming out this summer, are you writing them under Josh Haven?
The first one, the Russia book Siberia Job, is Josh Haven, and then the Montevideo Brief is J.H. Galanger. My agent told me I couldn't have a third pseudonym.
That's sort of weird. They
Well,
did
I
that
thought
with
it-
Donald Westlake too, because supposedly, he was writing so many books that he each one, he your publisher wants your next book always, right? Your publisher wants that next book. They don't want to have you also writing for another publisher, but they don't necessarily have room to do all your books if you're very prolific. And so in the case of Donald Westlake, he had to write books under a false name to, get them published, so that he wouldn't trip over himself and his publisher.
Larry Block did that too, Lawrence Block, and he
Yeah.
actually wrote as a woman part of the time to really confound everybody.
Yeah,
It
well,
only surfaced, later in the game that he was writing,
Yeah.
because they were writing for the pulps, essentially, writing for magazines, do you remember what Larry Block's female pseudonym was? I can't recall. Jill Emerson. Okay. Yeah. Well, we were just, but Josh is sticking to just two.
Well, I've been reading a lot of Lisa Jewell and Ruth Ware recently, and I thought it would be fun to write one of those, sort of a female protagonist British mystery novel. And so I thought, yeah. So my agent told me that it wasn't quite my name recognition. So I was ahead of him. I thought I could use the pseudonym Sue Dunham, which would be hilarious. But then he told me that that was in fact not at all funny, and and it would be a bad idea. So I've dumped that.
It's an interesting thought, though. I like the idea. Ruth Ware, Lisa Jewell, if you could
See,
do it.
Warren. Well, yeah, that's what I was going for. But the humor is evidently not universal in that.
Anybody else have a question? Yes, sir.
You need to take him to Whiskey Row and Prescott and Jerome.
That's true.
Yeah.
You would get inspiration you don't know about yet.
Who's this Jerome guy?
I grew up in that area.
It's an
right.
old mining ghost
I
town.
was thinking Jerome Kern, but
No.
probably not him.
Bisbee in one end and Jerome in another, and they're both very. Bisbee's the copper queen and the big copper mine in Jerome. What did they mine in Jerome? Was it silver? What was
It
Jerome?
was copper.
Was it copper too?
There was silver residue and gold that
Yeah,
capitalized on all of it.
Yeah, plot gold.
yeah. No, that'd be great. Then fewer saguaro. They're not so happy.
You see them on the way up on I-17 as soon as you clear Black Canyon City. They're all over the place.
They really are, and it's amazing how many of them survived the fire. You know, because there was a devastating fire going up there, but most of the saguaro made it through. They're really tough. If you go to the botanical garden, they have one lying on its side so you can see the whole rib structure, and it's really a fascinating piece of engineering in the floral world.
Yeah, the idea of a plant having a skeleton, which is what these dead saguaro apparently have, is tremendous.
Well, that's how they do the water storage. See, the skeleton expands with water, and then it can contract, and so if we'd only been that clever working out any way to capture water, now that we have a lot of it, but we didn't build any kind of system here in Phoenix, and apparently they didn't in California, a catchment system, but the saguaro was right there all along. Oh well. Anyway, anybody else have a question they'd like to ask? No, you're all stunned by our eloquence, and okay. Well, thank you very much for coming tonight. Let's give our authors a round of applause.
Oh,
And snaking back in there is an arc I put on the table. So what we're going to do, I can already tell who the winner is. It's,
I'm
it's,
sorry, what are
it's
we
by
looking for?
P.J. Tracy there. So this is sort of a tribute to Tom because it's a police series set in